Hello, I'm Des Dearlove, co-founder of Thinkers 50, and my special guests today are Harvard professor Amy Edmondson, renowned for her research into the concept of psychological safety, and author of The Fearless Organization and the Right Kind of Wrong, and Adam Grant, organisational psychologist at the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania, and the author of a string of best-selling books, including Think Again, Give and Take, and most recently, Hidden Potential. They are also number 1 and number 2 in the 2023 Thinkers 50 ranking. Amy, Adam, welcome.
Thanks for having us.
Excited to be here.
Fantastic. You've both got books out, both very interesting books, exciting books. What we're interested at Thinkers 50 at this point in time is to explore kind of the intersection between ideas. So that's what I'm hoping to do today. So if I can start with you, Adam, tell us a little bit about Hidden Potential and the message of the book.
For me, Hidden Potential is about the basic problem that we tend to underestimate our own capabilities, and we also frequently get underestimated by others. I think so many people judge potential by where they start, forgetting that it's ultimately a question of how far you can travel. And I wanted to explore basically how do we unlock the possibility that many of us don't recognize in ourselves and others until it's too late.
And one of the things I love about the book is the fact that, it allows for late bloomers. It allows for people to come into their strongest self as they get older.
That was part of what I wanted to dig into. Is there's so many people who idolize Mozart and think you have to be a child prodigy in order to go on to do great things. But if you look at the evidence, most adults who achieve great things actually didn't stand out as children. And when they did, it wasn't because they had some kind of innate talent. It was because they were highly motivated and passionate. So I think there's hope for the box too.
Okay, well, that's good to know. So I think one of your phrases is not necessarily genius by nature, but genius by nurture.
I wish I had written it that way. I like that phrasing much better. I think I said you don't have to be a freak of nature. You could be a freak of nurture. But let's be honest. Nobody wants to be a freak.
Okay. So what does that actually look like? Well, I mean, you when you were digging into this stuff, what did you actually find out? What can we actually learn from this?
I think the ultimate goal isn't performance. It's progress. And if you look at what drives progress, I've found that a big part of being able to move forward and keep improving is the character skills that you put into practice. So I'm not just talking about having principles. I'm talking about the capacity to take your values and put them into action in tough situations. And I found that the character skills that are often most important for driving growth include a willingness to embrace and seek out discomfort so that you stretch beyond your strengths, a capacity to be a sponge, which means absorbing information that might help you grow, even if it hurts your ego, and the willingness to be an imperfectionist, which means accepting that you're going to make mistakes, and some of those are actually necessary on the path to progress.
And actually, you talk about, deliberately sort of almost setting yourself a kind of a goal for making a certain number of mistakes a week.
Well, I met a polyglot named Benny Lewis, who I think is a master of this. He really struggled to learn foreign languages in school and now speaks a dozen. And he has a simple practice of going to a foreign country and saying, my goal is to become proficient in the language in 2 to 3 months. The way he does it is he does what he calls social skydiving, which is he has a goal of making at least 200 mistakes a day. And he knows that if the target is that many mistakes, he's going to use his evolving language skills enough to actually gain some familiarity with the vocabulary, to get some reactions and some feedback and some practice from native speakers. And I looked at that and thought, I don't want to make 200 mistakes in my life, let alone in a single day. But there is an aspect to this that I found really useful, which is I've started setting myself a failure budget. And the goal is to launch 3 projects every year that don't succeed. And 3 feels manageable. And it's not like I'm shooting for failure intentionally in any of those projects. But I know at the end of the year that if nothing failed, then I wasn't stretching myself enough. I wasn't taking on new challenges. I wasn't taking intelligent risks. And I think if we all expected even 5 to 10% of our projects to fail, we'd have a much easier time growing and learning.
And we become more comfortable with failure. But that seems like the perfect sort of segue in to talk to you, Amy, about the right kind of wrong, which is very much looking at the types of failure and the ones we should embrace.
There's so much overlap here, and it's just delightful. And Adam, I love the performance and progress and character and cognition. They're just very memorable and exactly right. So the I can't help it. Can I ask a question of Adam?
Of course, you're going to ask a question.
So 3 failures. I mean, to what extent would you know, or would people be tempted to know in advance that something's going to fail? Right? I'm going to get my 3 failures out of the way, and then I'm going to go do successes. Right? It seems to me no. Right? It wouldn't count if you. Then it would just be an exercise that wouldn't be in the spirit of this risk-taking, boldness, stretching idea that is really underlying what you're saying.
Yeah, I think that's right, Amy. I think that would completely defeat the purpose of the exercise. So the goal is to take on new challenges.
Right.
And I'm hoping all of them will succeed, but I'm trying to manage my own expectations by recognizing that if all of them succeed, I'm probably aiming too low.
I think that's exactly right. So it's a retrospective test, really. And it's a commitment to yourself and others that you're going to stretch, that you're going to do hard things that don't have a guarantee of success coming their way. And that's exactly consistent with right kind of wrong, the sort of the premise and the idea of an intelligent failure, because it is tempting, right? Our desire to avoid failure is so great that it is tempting, to go for the safe bets. But that won't allow us to get that slope, that progress that you've been talking about. So in a similar vein, I talk about intelligent failures, and really a better way to talk about them is intelligent risks. Right? These are the things that you have good reason to believe they might work, but they don't. They fail, and that it's disappointing, but it's not catastrophic because you had managed the risk. You knew there was a risk, and the risks don't involve human safety or economic consequences that you can't afford, or reputational consequences that would be foolish. So it's about forcing yourself to stretch, to grow, to undertake activities that are in the direction of some purpose or goal you want to achieve that just may not succeed the first time.
So what are the characteristics, Amy? I know this is what
Sure.
your research looks at. What are the characteristics of the right kind of wrong, effectively, these intelligent failures?
Right. So first of all, they're in pursuit of a goal. It's not just random actions, right? Maybe it's learn a new language, or maybe it's a new scientific discovery or a life partner. They're in pursuit of a goal, and they're in new territory. So you can't just look up the answer and produce it perfectly the first time. There's really no way to make the progress you're trying to make unless you're willing to try it, right? To take action. You have good reason to believe it might work. That is, it's hypothesis driven. You've done your homework. You've found out what there is to find out about this domain. And then finally, and importantly, it's as small as possible. You don't take bigger bets than you can afford, or as I said before, human safety bets. So it's those 4 criteria. I think it's very intuitive. And in organizations, at least where I spend most of my time, often missed, right? Especially the last one, where they'll either take the bet will be too small to learn anything, or too big to afford.
And what are the other types of failure? I mean, if that's the right kind of wrong, what's the wrong kind of wrong?
So a basic failure is an undesired result in familiar territory, where there is available knowledge, you have it at hand, and it's not used. It's in passenger air travel, if you have an airplane crash that was due to failing to put the anti-ice on, that's a basic failure. Huge, but basic nonetheless, and utterly preventable. And complex failures are multi-causal. They're the kind of the perfect storm. They're the many factors came together in just the wrong way and led to a failure, big or small, that any one of those factors on their own wouldn't have caused. I just saw an article in the New York Times about the Maui fires being a series of small failures that were not attended to and then end up with that catastrophic failure. That's a complex failure.
I think that's what they put some, the NASA accidents, the space shuttle incidents, where it's a series of things which weren't addressed, and then you have a catastrophic.
Exactly right. Both the Challenger and the Columbia shuttles were classic complex failures. Complex as can be, no one sort of simple cause, multiple factors, and utterly preventable ultimately.
Okay, so something I've been curious about since I saw the title of the book is, if there's a right kind of wrong, is there a wrong kind of right?
I suppose I should have seen that coming. Maybe building on what Adam said, the wrong kind of right is just playing it safe, right? Getting it right every time, staying in your comfort zone, and only doing those things that you know will work out perfectly. That could qualify as the wrong kind of right.
Okay, now we come back to you, Adam. Amy asked you a question. I'm going to encourage you. What would you like to ask Amy in return?
Oh, I have a lot of questions for Amy. And Amy, the good news is that I've been asking you them over the last few years. So I'm going to pick up right where we left off. I think I see a lot of leaders in organizations who are attracted to the idea of embracing taking risks and maybe even tolerating failure, and then they seem to take it too far. They say we should celebrate failure. And I don't know about you, I have never wanted to throw a party when I've failed. I think what you're pushing us to do is something different, which is to normalize failure as part of decision-making, as part of innovating, as part of learning. How do you strike that balance? How do you get people to embrace it without going overboard?
So I'm going to take a different word than balance. But first, let me say, I think you're absolutely right. I'm trying to normalize it, but maybe a better word is destigmatize it. Because when failure has a stigma, we will stay away from it, and then we're at risk of stagnation and all the other challenges that you were alluding to earlier. But it's not so much balance as a context-specific phenomenon, right? So I actually do believe in a failure party, if you can stomach the term, when you are doing something in new territory that involved a sizable amount of heartache and time and investments, like a clinical trial in a pharmaceutical company. But that is months and months of work. There's all this hope tied up in the idea that that drug will work to cure that terrible disease. And when it doesn't work, right, through no fault of any of the participants, they need something. Right now, they're not really celebrating the failure, but they're celebrating the fact of their commitment to trying. They're celebrating that they got good data, that they didn't hurt anybody unnecessarily, that they now know something they didn't know before, and that allows them to pivot. By having the ritual, if you will, I think three good things happen. One is that other people hear about it, right? People show up, and that at least can increase the chances that no one does the same failure a second time, right? Because there's nothing worse than the intelligent failure the second time around. It's not intelligent anymore. Number two, it sort of, acknowledges them for their hard work. And number three, I think there's some evidence that this idea of this ritual can make it easier for people to declare a failure in a timely way. There's this idea that, you start to suspect this thing is going south. And then let's fast forward 2 months. Now we finally tell somebody that, right? If we could shorten that window, that's a lot of value. Right? That's a lot of valuable resources that can be redeployed to something else. But just the it depends part is in new territory, right? When you're doing R&D, when you're doing science or doing something in your life that there's really no way to get the knowledge you need without the failure, then I think the celebration, or at least the generous praise is warranted. When you're, doing stupid stuff in familiar territory, no praise indeed, no party.
Now, what I was going to say, that I may be taking this in the wrong direction, but you did mention, that it could be about trying to find the right life partner. Some people celebrate divorce, in an enlightened situation, perhaps two people even who were once married to each other. could actually celebrate and acknowledge that they gave it their best shot, and that it just, but in fact it was the right kind of writing. All the intention was there, the purpose, all the elements were there, but it just didn't work out.
It's absolutely sometimes not only the right decision for one partner, but for both partners, and the split can be amicable and in pursuit of growth. And yes, it's worth the celebration, or at least the happy acknowledgement that we did the right thing.
Yeah. Well, and again, destigmatizing something else. But sorry, Adam.
Right.
Yeah, no, I can think of at least one divorce where there was a party held by the family and friends
on one side. Right?
Good riddance. Yeah, but Amy, one of the things I really like about the distinction you just made is you're saying, look, it's not the failure we should be celebrating; it's the effort and the learning.
Right. It's right. We're celebrating the learning. That's exactly right. And if we don't celebrate learning, because most learning is a little uncomfortable, go back to what you said. And so if we don't celebrate it, we're very willing to sort of not engage in it.
I mean, really what you're talking about, Adam, is us improving at improving. We've got to get better at getting better. It seems to me that's largely, which I think is a very, and by the way, a very kind of enlightening and liberating message for people.
Yeah, and it's probably easier said than done, because most of the time, when something goes well, we don't scrutinize it. I think one of the few sort of silver linings of failure, and Amy, this is one of the big lessons of your work, is when something goes very badly wrong, we study it. We learn from it. We improve our routines. We develop new practices. We throw out obsolete, what we used to call best practices, and replace them with better practices. When something goes well, when we make progress, we often don't pause to do the same analysis. And I think that's a missed opportunity. I wonder, so Amy, this leads me to another question for you. Just as, I guess this builds on the earlier discussion of the wrong kind of right. I think that if we flip your idea of an intelligent failure, there's also unintelligent success. Talk to us about that.
That's right. In fact, there's a mental model that I think most people have just unconsciously, that, if you try hard and you're smart, you get success. If you kind of mail it in, or you don't have talent, you'll get failure. When in fact, sometimes you try really hard, you're a scientist, you got a great hypothesis, you're in a leading lab, nonetheless, failure, right? And sometimes, and so this would actually be the wrong kind of right, you mail it in, you get lucky, you get this big success, and really, truly, nothing is learned. And in fact, if there is something learned, it's the wrong lesson for sure.
I mean, it reminds me of a session you did for us a few years ago, Amy, about particularly male leaders, as I recall, and having, where confidence and competence weren't aligned. And if you have too much confidence and the world doesn't teach you the lesson, you just carry on thinking you're great, and maybe you're not so great. And that presumably is the
We all need disconfirming data. And if you're not getting the disconfirming data, you can go along with all sorts of errors.
Which brings us, I mean, we all learn if we get the right sort of feedback. But Adam, you're talking about how you ask for feedback and the sort of feedback that actually allows us to improve.
Well, this is one of my biggest takeaways from the last few years of research on learning, is asking for feedback is actually not the best way to get useful feedback. It sounds ironic, but when you ask people for feedback, you tend to get two responses. One is a bunch of cheerleaders who applaud your best self, and that can make you complacent. The other is a bunch of critics who attack your worst self, and that can be extremely demoralizing. What you want are coaches, people who see your hidden potential and help you become a better version of yourself. And to get people to coach you, to get your critics and your cheerleaders to tell you something helpful, it's more effective empirically to ask for advice than feedback. When I ask you for feedback, you focus on what I did wrong or right yesterday. When I ask you for advice, you shift your attention to what I can do differently tomorrow. That's less likely to make me defensive. It's more likely to translate into something actionable that I can test out right away. And I think when most people hear that, what they do is they find one or two sources and they say, hey, give me a tip, or could I get a suggestion? And I don't think that's enough, because a lot of the advice you get is idiosyncratic. People are telling you what works for them, not what's going to work for you. So what I want to do is I often want to triangulate across 5, 6, 7, 8 people. And if a suggestion is only made by one person, it might be their idiosyncratic taste. If 4 or 5 different people have the same pointer, now we're dealing with an opportunity to make an objective improvement. They may have spotted a quality control issue. They may have a suggestion that will really make a difference for anybody who's trying to solve the problem or complete the task that you are. So I would say not only shift from feedback to advice, but also seek out more people's advice. And Amy, I think that goes to your point that we need disconfirming reactions. You only ask 1 or 2 people. It's too easy for them to validate your assumptions. You start asking more, you're more likely to have your beliefs challenged.
Absolutely. And so it's the feed forward rather than feedback, right? If we're facing forward together, we're likely to have a better quality conversation. You're likely to give me information that I can hear and that I'm maybe more able to put to use.
Another intersection between ideas and research, another place we've got over, it's very clear, Adam, because you draw on Amy's research into the Chilean mine rescue. It's interesting because earlier you were saying, and I think you're right, that often when something goes right, we don't analyze it and learn lessons from it. We pick on the failures and we pull them to pieces and we say we don't want to do that again. But the great thing about that piece of research that Amy did was to look at what went right within that environment that created that successful rescue.
Yeah, let me start by saying, Amy, I think you're in every book I've written. I can think of at least 4 books where I've cited your research prominently. And it's amazing how I feel like every time I take on a topic I care about, you've done some profound research on it, and you've said something important about how to think about it, not just as individuals, but as teams and collectives. And this is one of the ahas for me when I was reading your analysis of the Chilean mine rescue is you had a leader, Andre Sugaret, who really understood that it was an experience that was going to lead people to the best idea. It was fresh perspectives. And it hadn't really occurred to me until I went through and I don't want to explain your own research to you, but
oh, I love it.
No, I mean, I think maybe the concise way to say it is it hadn't occurred to me that in the very moment where you have the most urgency, the stakes are impossibly high, and you have so much time pressure, you want the leader who's the best listener. I would have thought the exact opposite, that in that circumstance, you need the decisive, action-oriented doer. And you completely flip that upside down. So thank you for that. And can you walk us through why that makes sense?
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
Very counterintuitive.
So there's a real distinction between known territory and unknown territory. Had this been a rescue operation where we know how to do this, then you want the top-down leader who's going to say, okay, this is going to be hard, but I need you to do this. This is what it's going to look like. No listening, speed, here we go. But this was quite literally new territory. I mean, it was, on day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, the only certainty was that it couldn't be done, right? Nothing like this had ever been done before for a variety of reasons we don't need to go into right now. So it was a giant innovation project. And if you have a giant innovation project, you had better be listening. And you'd better be listening to ideas from many different perspectives. And hear how consistent this is with Sheena's Think Bigger work that we talked about yesterday. Gosh, it seems like a long time ago already. But it's innovation happens when we're hearing from very different perspectives, different industries, different areas of expertise, sometimes even different sectors, and we're willing to listen and integrate and synthesize and try stuff, knowing it might not work, and learn fast, pivot, try again, try something else.
Yeah, part of what was stunning to me about that analysis is it's the listening that surfaces the hidden potential in this case in a early 20s engineer who in most organizations, in most teams, would not have had a voice in the first place, but not only was heard, ended up driving the solution that ultimately led to the rescue.
Igor. I love Igor. But you know what I say about that? I mean, or one of the things I say that's almost the hidden potential of Igor, as you said, nobody would have ordinarily listened to this 23-year-old technician who's, way down in the hierarchy. The fact that Andrei Sugaret listened to him, literally was game-changing to the ultimate outcome. But imagine you now look back on that story and you think about how his life must have been changed, right? That he had the experience of someone listening to him in a position of leadership, had his idea get put to good use. I can't help but think his life was forever changed by that experience, right? So leadership is not just the getting things done, which indeed happened here, but also the developing of people along the way while getting things done.
Okay, so we're going to look for some takeaways here. I mean, we're talking about leaders. We're talking about how you create a space, a listening space, which goes back to the conversation that Megan Rates and Jim Dittert were having at the Thinkers 50 Awards Gala just yesterday, which I thought was a great session, by the way. How do you, based on, you've both done this research, what are the takeaways for leaders? I'll start with you, Amy.
Context matters, right? And so, and let's be simple about it. Context to me is essentially, is this a really well understood, very familiar context? Is this a fairly well understood context where there's lots of variability? So we better be figuring out how to do things differently based on what we were seeing. Or is this novel, brand new innovation, science, discovery? And what are the stakes? And if the stakes are high in human safety or economic terms, we're gonna tread carefully in a different way than if the stakes are low. So first, just taking stock of what's the context, and then taking the right kinds of risks based on that. That for me is the biggest takeaway.
But in order to do that, presumably you've got to have created a culture, or you've got to create a culture where people can
bingo.
Feel comfortable. Right. I think we call it psychological safety, don't
Something
we?
like that. Yeah, let's call it psychological safety. How about that?
Perfect. And Adam, what are the kind of the leadership lessons from your latest research?
Well, I'm going to build right on Amy's work. So I've been informed by her thinking about psychological safety, really curious about what can leaders do to build it. And in a project with Konstantinos Koutaferis, we found that it's not always enough to ask people for input because they don't really know if you mean it. How many times has an employee thought, you can't handle the truth? So when there's a lack of psychological safety, when people have hesitations, founded or not, what leaders can do is, instead of asking for constructive criticism and suggestions, to actually criticize themselves and give themselves advice out loud. I've seen leaders do this by sharing their own performance reviews from their bosses with their teams. I saw one CEO who actually put his 360 from his board on his office door, the outside, not the inside, so that anybody who met with him could see what he was trying to get better at. And I think a lot of leaders are afraid to do that. And what I would remind them of is the people who work with you closely,
they already know.
You can't hide it. So you might as well get credit for having the self-awareness to see it, and the humility and integrity to admit it out loud. And that to me is a big part of building psychological safety. But Amy, you gave me another perspective on this over the summer when we were talking. I was working really hard to try to make it safe for the people around me to speak up. When I was, looking for notes and suggestions on book projects and new podcasts, and sometimes it wasn't enough. And I was criticizing myself out loud, and they still weren't speaking up. And you said, you don't just need to make it safe, you also need to make it worthwhile. Talk to them about why you need their voice in particular. That has made such a massive difference since I've had those conversations. So thank you for that. And I want to hear you talk about that a little bit more. Talk about the, not just the eliminating the fear, but convincing people that their voice makes a difference.
I think the most important thing is to connect it to the work, right? Because it's one thing to say, we want psychological safety. Leaders need to maybe go first, criticize themselves, be vulnerable. That'll make it more psychologically safe. And indeed it will. But psychologically safe for what, right? And it's psychologically safe for learning, for performance, ultimately, for getting really hard work done that we believe is worth doing. So I think by bringing it back, just bringing the team back to what's the work we're doing, why is it important, why does it need you, setting that rationale, and then making it harder to not speak than to speak. And the best way to do that is what Des has been doing this whole time, which is ask questions. Whenever he asks us a question, we would feel mighty awkward just sitting here mute, right? It just wouldn't work, right? So if leaders can sort of set that stage, this is why we need you, this is why it's important, this is why it's exciting, and then ask good, genuine questions, the rest will follow.
And that's back to your point from the beginning about being purpose driven, having, doing something intentionally because we are on a journey, we have a purpose, we have a mission, and it's important.
It matters.
Yeah. Okay, last question. How has these findings, do you practice what you preach? That is my question to you both. What have you changed in your own lives based on what you've discovered? Adam?
I'm going to say no, I don't practice what I preach because I don't want to be preaching anything. I do want to practice what I teach.
There you go.
Okay.
That's
better. That's a saying, don't you?
I mean, yes, but I object to the phrasing of the saying, and I want to revise it. So, I want to practice what I teach, but sometimes it's teaching it that reminds me I'm not practicing it. So, it was writing Hidden Potential that made me realize, sometimes I will get off a stage or finish a class and say, "What feedback do you have?" as opposed to asking, "What's the one thing I can do better?" And I've become much more disciplined about the practice of asking for advice after I've advised other people to do it. And I think for me, that's a reminder that the advice you give to other people is usually the advice that you need to take for yourself.
I seem to remember a few years ago when your Think Again book was out, and you saying that people should, kind of reframe things and look at things differently. And then people, I think the class you were teaching, you realize you've been teaching it the same way for a couple of years, and actually it was time to shake it up a bit.
There's nothing more humbling than your students saying, "You're not following your own principles that you literally taught in this class session. Why are you not rethinking the class on rethinking?"
Yeah. And Amy, what are you? I mean, are you more comfortable with failure?
I don't love failure. I got to admit, I do experience it, more often than I want to. But I think I write about that which I need to learn, and that's true for psychological safety. I mean, I think the whole idea of me search, meaning you sort of pursue the things that are hard for you. I was kind of a traditional scaredy cat, an introvert, a shy girl, right? And speaking up with, real concerns or need for help, that didn't come naturally. So I wanted to understand that better, even though I didn't set out to do that on purpose. And then the failure thing, I really try so hard to distinguish in my own life and work the difference between an intelligent failure and the not so intelligent ones, and try, as Adam was describing at the very beginning, to increase the percentage of the intelligent ones.
That's fantastic. Listen, thank you both very much for such an engaging conversation. It is great to explore, the kind of the intersections and the overlaps. So thank you for that. And congratulations again on your placings in the Thinkers 50 ranking. And thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for the gift of bringing us together. I love spending time with Adam.
The sentiments are mutual.
All right, guys. Have a fantastic rest of your day.